Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in our Leading Through Crisis series. My name is David Myers, and I'm responsible for our new business in the West at Project Line. My colleague Reggie Fernandez is on as well, and he looks after the East. So just a couple of quick notes before we get rolling. All of you are in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions at any point, just type them into the questions panel. We'll allow a few minutes at the end for Q&A to field any questions. So the webinar is being recorded. We'll send you out a link to the recording tomorrow so that you can share it with colleagues who may not have been able to join. All right, so every day more and more facets of the economy are reopening, and it's fantastic to see. So today we're going to turn our attention to how to reopen safely. Lisa Seppala is the founder of True North Implementation. She's got 30 years of experience enabling companies to operate in compliance so they can minimize bureaucracy and just focus on growing the business. She's really got a knack for translating best practices from large enterprise to small and medium-sized businesses, so in a very practical way. So Lisa, it's all you.
Thanks, David, and thanks Project Line for giving me this time. I'm going to stop sharing my webcam now and just get into the presentation. So welcome to everyone listening in. I hope each of you is managing to stay safe. When it comes to the response to COVID-19, I'm sure you can easily think of organizations that have impressed you and the ones that haven't. Whether they're small local businesses or large multinationals, during this time, the leading organizations are the ones that have taken charge of safety. They're the ones in the media for the good news stories, not the bad. Their leaders are visible, CEOs are out there and not too concerned about appearing perfect. They've been quick to mobilize and adjust as needed. Safety is tangible, customers and employees feel it. And increased housekeeping frequency, clear communication, traffic and occupancy control, and leaders leading are visible indicators. In the first phase of our lockdown, some rose to the occasion and others didn't, and customers remember both. Sadly, as we've all seen, safety failures during COVID-19 are front and center in the media, provincially, nationally, and globally. One incident of COVID-19 exposure can result in multiple employees and customers getting sick, and some may even die. And if that weren't enough on its own, an investigation will be required with perhaps multiple government agencies involved. And if you as an employer are not seen to be taking measures to protect your workers, enforcement will be considered. Enforcement can range from orders, including stop work orders, and administrative penalties such as fines. For negligence, criminal prosecution could result. In BC, and I'm sure other jurisdictions, your COVID-19 safety plan must be posted in your workplace, and WorkSafe BC will be conducting inspections. Those usually come without warning. I think I'm preaching to the converted, though, or you wouldn't be participating on this call. Safety is a leadership choice. It's intentional. Managing safety and building a plan takes time, but it does get easier once you get your plan implemented. Next slide. So today I'll be covering opening on a new playing field, balancing perspectives and legal requirements. I'll be covering a couple of planning tools. One is the PlanDoCheckAct cycle, or it's sort of the underpinning of the safety management system. And I'll also be covering the hierarchy of controls. I do have an example that I will be touching on that is something that is just a really simple example of how you can apply these tools, and it's something that would be useful for any business and transferable to any business. And lastly, I'll talk about available resources to you. Next slide. So just as we had a plan for lockdown, we now need to plan our steps to reopen. The virus hasn't left. They're predicting a second wave. There's talk on the media right now from our Dr. Bonnie Henry that things could be in a quasi shutdown, lockdown mode until December. So there's a lot that we have to really get used to. The virus is still here. We need to proceed in a methodical way and expect that we'll be in some form of lockdown for several months. The new realities we all need to face until there's a vaccine will be in this state of wariness. Some things are likely gone for good. The handshake, close-knit quarters such as you would find in a waiting room, cramped seating in public transportation. Some things will have changed for the better, hand washing and improved housekeeping everywhere. Business leaders will need to show up as safety leaders for employees and customers, perhaps in a more visible way than in prior times. So if a good example of this is if you typically work in an office environment, you've probably not had to deal with high hazard situations, and now you're going to have to think about the safety of everyone who accesses your facility. And so all of a sudden you're dealing with hazards that you didn't have to deal before, and you're going to need to be visible. You're going to have to monitor and embrace regulatory changes so that your business can continue to operate. And that's not a bad thing. I've worked with some world-class organizations who always started with safety in mind at a strategic level, and that would translate into safety on the shop floor and lead to increased productivity and profits. Next slide. As you build your plan, you'll need to wear a few different hats. Your customers, your employees, your businesses, any contractors that are working for you, and your own as a leader. What does each party need? The customer, am I safe doing business with this company? The employee or contractor, am I safe working for this company? Workers have a legal right to refuse unsafe work. From a business perspective, how are you going to safeguard your reputation? Will you be able to protect your workers and your customers? And what happens if you can't? You should check out your provincial health agencies and workers' compensation agencies for specific directions. How you progress through this phase is really on you. There's a lot to consider. The rules seem to change daily, so let's talk about a couple of tools that can help you. Next slide, please. So this is the PlanDoCheckAct cycle or approach. It's an underpinning for safety management systems everywhere. I've seen it being used in business, in strategy development, in operations, and also safety. Anywhere having a systematic approach can add value. PlanDoCheckAct is the base for any safety management systems model. So ISO, CSA, your provincial workplace safety regulator. It's the underpinning of the models used by those agencies. It's scalable. You can ramp it up or down depending on your needs in any situation. And it helps you as a leader. It helps you ensure you've got everything covered. The four main elements are plan, do, check, act, and each contains a number of sub-elements, as you can see from this slide. Plan is about gathering all the input that will inform your plan and then making decisions on where you want your plan to take you. This isn't work that should be done in a vacuum. Participation is key. Is your leadership team involved and committed? Have you involved workers in developing the plan? Particularly for COVID-19, this is critical. Your workers are on the front line, often the ones who are facing the customers and having interaction with the public. They're going to know where potential sources of contamination are, where the hazards are. You should involve them because they can help you, they can help themselves, and they can help the customer as well. So my recommendation is you use them throughout this whole cycle and just make sure that they're engaged and involved. Have you checked your existing safety plan to see where you need to make temporary changes to accommodate COVID-19? This could be the quickest way for you to actually mobilize your safety plan for COVID-19 if you've already got an existing safety plan for your company. Do you know what you're required to do from a legal perspective, from all perspectives, including the workers and the customers' perspectives? Do you know where the hazards and the risks are? In the safety world, the practice of going through a hazard identification and risk assessment, a HIRA, is well known. You should be doing the same. Where and how can people be exposed to COVID-19? What level of risk is present, and what do you need to prevent exposure? Do you know what you want to accomplish from your health and safety plan? Can you articulate that in a policy, in objectives and metrics? So that's the plan phase of this cycle. Doing is all about operationalizing your plan. And thinking about it in advance is valuable, and pulling it all together into a program is is incredibly important for your business. How do you need to structure your business, and what resources do you need to deliver your product or service safely? What measures do you need to put in place to protect your workers and customers? These could be soft measures such as procedures, or hard measures such as physical barriers. And what is your training plan for employees related to COVID-19 procedures? And also, having been off work for some time, do your employees need refresher training in order to do their core jobs safely? These are things you need to consider. What do you need to communicate regarding your plan, and to whom? And how are you going to do that? Are you prepared to work with suppliers and contractors safely? Do you need to review your contracts with them? If you work at a multi-employer work site, are you coordinating with the other employers at that site to make sure the response is coordinated? What will you do in the event of an exposure incident? Do you have a process in place to follow? Have you checked for guidance with the workers' compensation regulator? How will your regular emergency management practices have to be altered? So think of evacuations. If you have to evacuate a facility, how do you do that in a world where we need to have physical distancing? How will you manage the inevitable changes that will come over the next weeks and months? Will you be able to nimbly respond to ensure that all aspects of your business will adjust? That's talking about management of change. How do you quickly respond to change? How are you recording all that you've done? Do you know that some documents you're required to keep legally? What ones are those? That's where you need to go to your regulator to find that out. The check part of the cycle is about ensuring you're on the right track. So how do you know what you're doing is making a difference? How are you progressing against the objectives you set out in the plan phase? If there is an exposure, do you know why it happened and what you need to do to prevent it in the future? Do you have preventative checking and inspections taking place? What about audits? If you need to take corrective actions, how are they going to be incorporated into your operations? The last part of this cycle is about acting, and it's also about engagement again. Do you meet regularly with your management team to review progress? Are there ways that you can improve going forward? And if there are, how do you incorporate those into this cycle? Next slide, please. Another valuable tool is the hierarchy of controls. It's relied on by organizations and regulators for occupational safety, process safety, and designing for safety. If you've not seen it before, it basically covers off the 5 types of barriers you can put in place to protect people from a hazard. The most robust and effective is elimination of the hazard, and the least effective is PPE, personal protective equipment. In fact, PPE is considered a last resort barrier. As you're thinking of preventative and protective measures to keep your employees and customers safe from harm, think of how many of these measures you can employ. Think about layering. Think about defense in depth. PPE should not be the only protective measure you take. Elimination is about removing the hazard, and it's the most effective. So the temporary closures that we've had recently is elimination control. Substitution is ask yourself, can you actually replace the hazard? If the hazard is contact with people, is there something you can do to minimize that contact? So touchless pay is a good example, or curbside pickup is another great example of substitution. Engineering controls, can you isolate people from the hazard? Think of the plexi shields at cashier stations, or installing physical barriers such as gates. Administrative controls are really about getting people to work differently. Working 6 feet apart from each other, following new procedures are examples of that. PPE is basically, how can I protect the person with protective gear? So clearly, a client service associate working for you will be safer behind a plexi shield with touchless pay and a 6-foot distance rule than simply relying on one of those barriers. Or factory work will be safer if workers can be provided with more space, smaller crews, adjusted work schedules, wearing gloves when sharing tools, and more frequent cleaning of those tools. So now that we've reviewed 2 key safety management tools, I'm going to show you something that a current example. This is a real life example And it is a very simple example, but I'm sure some of you are going to be familiar with it. And it's directly transferable to any business, including those working in office setting or operational settings, such as manufacturing or distribution. Next slide, please. So this example features a strata corporation in BC. It's a real-life example. I'm the council president for our condominium tower. For people outside of BC, strata council president is the same thing as a condo board president. Our strata corporation also owns a rec center that is used by our building and 3 others of similar size. Our building alone is valued at $85 million. Approximately 300 people live in our building and approximately 1,000 people in the entire complex. My immediate team includes volunteers, council members, emergency preparedness team, a site manager / caretaker who's also our employee, a cleaning crew who are contractors, property manager who's a contractor, and numerous trades accessing the property daily who are contractors. From a safety perspective, we have responsibility for the safety of our own employee and volunteers. We need to ensure hazards are identified for our contractors, and we have to ensure the premises are safe for all owners and visitors. We have a COVID-19 plan in place currently because we've never fully closed, with the exception of the rec center, but we've had to allow people to get to their homes. And with the BC economy starting to open up, we're evaluating how our plan may have to change. So we're going through this checklist. We created a checklist that's based on the PlanDoCheckAct cycle. In the planning phase, I'm meeting with my team and we're assessing the current state. So what's working, what's not, what do we need to change? We're looking at all of the information that's available online from the regulators, and really understanding if there's any new requirements that we have to incorporate into our planning. We're updating our HIRA, focusing on potential areas of transmission. So looking again at what we're doing with our elevators, and also now that the gym, we're talking about opening up the gym and the pool facilities. So what do we have to do there? We're updating our objectives and our targets, and also our internal COVID-19 rules, which is the equivalent of a policy. Moving over to the operationalization of our plan, so the do phase, we're reviewing our staffing, the availability of people, the training that they need, any contract requirements that need to be adjusted. We're updating our procedures, ensuring, like looking at the inventory of PPE. Do we need to order more? Do we have enough to last us over the next several months? We're refreshing the signing and direction for owners. So one of our substitution directives was really to try to use the stairs instead of the elevator, so that people who really need to use the elevator can have access to it and be safe. Other signs, physical distancing direction for owners and visitors and contractors, so updating those signs, and also physical barriers, looking at what we can remove or what needs to stay in place, and those are engineered controls. All other signs and sources of instruction throughout the building, we're looking at those, seeing what else has to be applied. We're refreshing our emergency evacuation procedures, and we actually did this a couple weeks ago, where we just said, really, if we have an evacuation, we're going to need to make sure people are physically distancing. So we're just reviewing that program as well, and making sure that everyone's up to date on that, including the floor wardens. We're looking at our record keeping and document keeping process, and also confirming that we can react nimbly to any changes that might come about from the various government agencies. From a checking perspective, this is ongoing business for us. So every day, inspecting the grounds, the property, the building, walkabouts with staff. We haven't had any incidents so far, touch wood. But we do have people trained who can lead investigations as needed with the different authorities. We're constantly implementing adjustments and improvements as a result of our inspections, and we're planning an audit at the 3-month mark. In terms of the act phase of the cycle, We have monthly meetings with our Strata Council and Emergency Preparedness team, and we review the progress around COVID-19 at those meetings. And there's usually a lot of discussion, and we just make sure that we incorporate any of the input and good ideas into our operational plan. Next slide, please. Because this is a presentation for a general audience, I can only direct you to key authorities where you'll see directions specific to your industry or province. Your workers' compensation agencies should be your first point of reference. In BC, we have WorkSafe BC, and they have an entire section of their website devoted to COVID-19. They've been working closely with the BC Centre for Disease Control, and they have a safety plan template that you can follow. Other sources of key information include municipal, provincial, and federal governments and agencies, industry associations. I've seen a lot of webinars from various associations being posted on LinkedIn. So they're doing work to look at what's required for their specific industry. Chambers of Commerce. I'm a member of the Tri-City Chamber of Commerce, and they've been consolidating all of the information that they see in the media every day and on various websites, and they provide a service for their members, a consolidated view of the different programs that are available. Quality safety service providers are also something that you should rely on. If you don't have them already in your employment, check online, especially if you're in a more complex safety environment or operating environment. Quality safety service providers can actually do you a great service and help make sure that your plan is addressing all of the hazards that you face. So that's the presentation. So I'll now turn the mic back to David and Project Line.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks so much everyone for attending, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.